Hey guys, it's BMT115 here, and I have a gameplay speculation and discussion video I'd like to talk to you guys with about Resident Evil Village's combat, as well as some of the lore we can see explain possibly some of the different fighting styles we'll have to use during the game's story, and as we progress throughout the game, different ways we'll be able to fight the enemies based on some footage I've seen. Now, as I've been keeping tabs on Village's discussion, I've noticed that no one mentions how the enemies of the game will require us to fight them differently based on the type of enemy we're fighting, perhaps how far we are into the game fighting them, and a little bit of backstory that could explain this. As we all know, we've seen Alcina Dimitrescu and her three daughters plenty of times in the gameplay and the demos. As of last week, we've just been given a glimpse of combat fighting the other vampires that we've seen deep in the cellar of the castle, some lesser vampires. Once again, I don't see anyone mentioning how we'll have to take a different approach to each enemy based on what kind of enemy they might actually be. The same goes with Heisenberg and the Lycan clan. We only got to see the short 20 seconds of combat with them, and I noticed some hints to different fighting style after evaluating the footage a little bit closer. As for the vampires, we've only been hinted to see 2 to 3 different vampire variants, not counting Alcina herself. The regular vampires seem to be closely related to the molded in Resident Evil 7, being that they move more unpredictably, more sluggish until they get within close range and go for a short lunge attack. The second type are of course Alcina's three daughters, or the witches as Capcom have named them. As far as we can tell, their main ability is that you can't really outrun them. They'll go into a bug, cloud, or a mist that can easily catch up to you in a second or two. Perhaps that only triggers when they're at medium and long distances. If you manage to get a lead on them, they could just turn into that and immediately end up behind you and get a nice easy hit in. It is also possible that the only way to properly avoid them would be to look at them within a medium distance, so backing up to wherever your destination might be and then just to book it to where you're trying to go at the last possible second. Sort of like Slender Man, but instead of looking away from him, you have to look at them, because I've seen they move a little bit slower when you look at them at a certain range and keeping eye contact with them. That is very plausible. I am going to guess that flamethrowers or grenade launchers, any of those kinds of weapons, will be very effective against them when they're in their bug form, considering we've seen Ethan shoot them, and that didn't really do any damage, it looked. So that's the daughters. The third variant, we aren't even sure is an enemy that we can fight. It could just be some kind of decorative character in the back, but in a very short 2-second clip, we can see flying bat creatures circling the castle towers. I can't say much more on that other than pure speculation and the 1 to 2 second glimpse that we've seen. That's literally all we know, is that they're there. We don't know what they are specifically. As for Alcina herself, I'm going to predict that she will be a Tyrant Mr. X variant for this game. She'll just be following us around the castle as we mess things up for her and make progress through the story. She'll probably be unkillable until probably a boss encounter at the end of the game. Moving away from the castle briefly, let's talk about Heisenberg and the Lycan clan. Now, Heisenberg will certainly be another boss character like Alcina, and he seems to be one of the first ones we have to put up with. As far as I know, he will be the giant Lycan that we see in all the gameplay teasers with the giant hammer. As for the other Lycans, this is something I saw that made me want to make this video in the first place. To start, I noticed in the scene where the player playing the demo missed the explosive barrel, and they cut away just barely before we could see a Lycan go into a sprint attack. Now, if you look at this clip, you can clearly see in slow motion that before the barrel explodes, the Lycan gets down on all fours and starts to book it to us just before the barrel explodes. Of course, we were all too busy roasting how bad of a shot the guy took, but to even notice this minor detail in the corner of the screen. So I'm gonna predict that lichens will move slowly at first, and if we don't attack them or if we're about to run out of ammunition, they will just straight up run at us, which is very different. You don't really see many enemies in a Resident Evil other than the dogs really run after you. So far, all we know about the combat is just that. We don't know much regarding other enemies. It's just the vampires and a few werewolf scenes that we've seen briefly. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk a little bit of story speculation as to what the deal is between House Heisenberg and Dimitrescu and what might happen between them in the story. From what I'm seeing in the story, Alcina tends to hire a female exclusive staff seen in the Maiden demo. One thing I want to know is that there are 3 candidates that are chosen on that list in the demo: Irina, Mihaela, and Lois. I wonder if they are actually Alcina's daughters that we see attacking us in all the gameplay footage. It is possible that we haven't got their names yet, but it is, it's a theory as to that could be, because there's only 3. So it might actually be who they are. The only 3 candidates are the 3 witches we currently see, and they could be one of the first ones, explaining why they're so early on the list. Meanwhile, the maiden herself dies at the demo, but when she is in the main hall, she sees the clothing burning in the fireplace, referencing that she is wearing the same thing that she has on. These clothes look awfully similar to the vampires we see in the dungeons. So as for Castle Dimitrescu, I'm gonna bet that Alcina is finding young women, hiring them as castle staff, where at some point she performs experiments or some kind of test on the girls one at a time and then keeps them locked up in the dungeons downstairs. If they are successful with whatever test, they are initiated into the witch coven that they have going on. The others, unfortunately, seem to be left down there to rot, or left to mutate into these lesser vampires that we see they all turn into down there. It almost seems like whatever virus Alcina and her daughters possess doesn't always bond to the host properly and leaves them a shell of their former self. Alcina and the witches seem to keep their minds and bodies healthy and young from the virus, while the others become brainless, bloodthirsty ghouls or lesser vampires who don't retain their beauty or mental state. Moving to Heisenberg's house, what we fail to see with Heisenberg is that this seems to be a male-only group with the lichens. I haven't seen any female lichens. None of us have seen any female lichens. However, people have claimed the one roaring at the end of the trailer could be female. I don't believe so, because the clothes match what some of the male characters are wearing, the facial hair, the type of haircut that they have with the bangs. They all look too similar to the other male lichens that are attacking Ethan. We don't really have any lore or context as what Heisenberg is doing in the story. It could be some sort of a sibling rivalry, or just the brother wanting his own path from his older sister. It could have an effect on the virus itself. So what I've noticed, my hypothesis on the virus, is that it affects men and women differently if it is the same virus in the family. Men tend to turn into werewolves and lichens, while women tend to become bloodthirsty vampiric type beings. And there's also variants in the vampires themselves. We haven't seen really any variants with the lichens other than you just straight up turn into a werewolf. But with the vampires, you have these bat-looking vampires, you have obviously Alcina and the witches, and then you have the lesser vampires. I could be wrong. Remember, this is all pure speculation as to what the virus is, so just take anything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But seeing how each of them react to Ethan's presence might actually hold a bit of weight. For instance, the daughter saying, "I haven't cut open a man in a while," implies that only men get turned into vampires at the castle. They're not really invited to the castle, if ever. So I'm guessing that based on those dialogue interactions, all the men in the village are hunted by the werewolves and thus turned into werewolves by Heisenberg to kind of grow an army, while all the women in the village are recruited by Alcina and brought into the safety of the castle only to suffer the same fate and turn into vampires or lesser vampires and just be experimented on. So each of them seem to be building up this army. So we're probably going to end up with this underworld vampire versus werewolves type story. Or we could even see a boss fight where Alcina and Heisenberg fight one another, and we see vampires and werewolves, and Ethan is just caught in the middle of this giant freaking fight at the end of the game. Anything's possible. It would be really cool if they went that way, because we've all seen how Alcina doesn't talk about Heisenberg in the brightest light. She insults him a lot, and he tends to stay away from the castle. Another outcome that actually kind of enforces this as an ending is no one notices in the glimpses in the trailer of the scarecrows outside the castle walls. They all look like Lycans. Now, they could also just be village folk, but this all seems like a very Vlad the Impaler type deal, where you stake your enemies in front of the castle walls to scare anyone away. She could be hanging up werewolves that made their way into the castle. She could have just killed them, strung them up as a warning to ward off the other werewolves, thus keeping each pack kind of to themselves. You have the werewolves on this side of the map, you have the vampires in the castle and in the dungeons underneath the castle. So a lot is going on. I believe by next week, when we see the new gameplay reveal that they're going to do, and we'll get the demo probably that evening when they release all the stuff, I'm thinking we're going to see a bunch of stuff relating to Heisenberg in that video, because they hinted at Heisenberg a little bit more in this one than they really did with Alcina, because we've already got plenty of footage of the Vampire Coven and all that stuff. We have not seen a single thing for the werewolves. So my guess is that for this demo, we're going to go full-on werewolf, and we're going to get more context as to what their fighting style and variants could be. I will record, obviously, playing the demo for the PS4, because no one has a PS5. Hardly anyone does, so not really anyone got to play Maiden other than big shot YouTubers. So hopefully the footage comes out good. I'm really hoping the graphics and the lighting and just whatever they had to tweak for the last gen versions of the game, I hope it all came out great, because after Cyberpunk's whole debacle, I don't trust demos until I get my hands on them now. Because remember, they showed us that E3 2018 demo and it was all a complete lie. So until I get the demo in my hands next week, then I'll judge if I think the graphics look good enough or subpar or average, or if they're better than Resident Evil 7's graphics. Because Resident Evil 7 had some amazing graphics for the PS4 and Xbox One. So I'm really hoping they can kind of push that same level just a little bit with more detail for this game, and then eventually we'll all upgrade to a PS5. Once we're able to get one, they'll give us a free upgrade and we'll get to replay the game with the true lighting engine that they want us to play it with. But anyway, that's all the speculation and discussion that I have for combat and a little bit of story for the video. If any of you have seen any more strange things and little glimpses of footage that no one else seems to notice, please comment it down below. Put a timestamp and which clip it is, and we might discuss that in a future video. But until then, I will see you guys in the next video.